Hello and welcome to Motorsport Week's F1 podcast series, Motorsport Speak, the show where we discuss about the latest that is happening in the world of Formula One. Tom Cairns, your host, alongside Nathan Hine, Joe Ellis and Dornie Burnett. We look back on the first race of the new season as Lewis Hamilton withstood the pressure from a hard-charging Max Verstappen to come away with the victory. Sergio Perez's formation lap problems didn't stop him from climbing back up to fifth on his Red Bull debut. Yuki Snowden had shone in the Alfa Tauri, whilst Sebastian Vettel got off to a disappointing start with his new team. We'll also run down on the latest F1 news and we'll answer your questions on the Bahrain Grand Prix itself. Good evening, Joe. Good evening, Nathan. Good evening, Donnie. How are we all? The first of what is the scheduled 23 race season is over and out. We've got a long way to go in this championship. We've got another 3 weeks before the next one comes around. But Joe, has Bahrain set the ball rolling for the new year?
Thanks for having me on again, Tom, first of all. And I'll say, if all 23 races, or the 22 left, are like that one, we're going to have one hell of a season, aren't we? It was an all-action race. There was no lull, if you like. Most races have a period where not much is happening, but the fact that there was always something to be looking out for, cars close together on track battling, just made it for a great spectacle.
Yeah. Donnie, welcome to Motorsport Speak. It's the first podcast that motorsportwe.com has had you on since we started podcasting last year. But yeah, it's the first time ever in Formula One that a twilight race has opened the opening round of the season. And boy, did it set some fireworks.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you so much for having me on, firstly. It's great to be here. It was just so good. I loved it. It was so much fun, and it was such a great way to start the season back. Like, we're so used to having Australia as the first race, and it not quite delivering, but this honestly set the scene for the whole season. And as Joe said, if the whole season's like this, then we are in for a treat.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And Nathan, you've obviously sort of studied what's happened over the course of the weekend in terms of how each and every team has done. What have you learned from the Bahrain weekend?
Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. But yeah, I would say that what we've learned from the first weekend is it's not going to be quite like 2020. I think this is a whole new ball game, a whole new different kind of dynamic that we've got on here. Mercedes initially from the weekend seem to be the ones on the back foot compared to 7 seasons where they've had it pretty much all their own way. So I think we're going to be in for one hell of a fight. Red Bull and Verstappen are certainly going to be fighting back and hoping to come out on top next time. So yeah, they're going to be up for it. And hopefully, if the rest of the year, the rest of the season's like that, as they've said, then it's going to be one hell of a fight.
Joe, I mean, how intense was those last few laps there? Because it looked as though that Verstappen had the tyres to make up the ground on Lewis and all the power. And it seems as though that Lewis, with all his ability, experience, and with the leftover power within his Mercedes, he was just about able to fend him off from behind. And would you say that was one of his best performances of his Formula One career when you look at it?
I mean, Lewis has had a fair amount of good performances in his however many years he's been racing, but this is the fight we've been waiting for, really. Years have gone by. We think Verstappen's going to be the next person to challenge, and he's not properly challenged. I think this year he will, and that performance, I think, looks better than it actually was in a way. I think he sort of just drove the car to its capabilities and no further, and it was enough on the day to beat Verstappen.
Donnie, were you surprised by Hamilton's pace? Because I felt that Verstappen was able to make up the ground because I think he was on fresher tyres on the last stint, but Lewis was able to, hold him off in those last few laps, despite Verstappen getting ahead of him briefly before being told to give the place up, which is something we'll go on to later in the podcast. But how surprised were you of Hamilton's pace on that last stint?
Yeah, I think everyone was obviously so surprised. Red Bull definitely came into the weekend as the favourites. They absolutely dominated, and even all through testing as well, well, not all through, but for the majority of testing, there was always this question about who had the advantage, and the fact that Red Bull were kind of looking like the favourites. And I think, as a lot of the commentators said, it was Red Bull's race to lose. So I think everyone was shocked by how kind of good Hamilton's performance was there. But perhaps, like Joe was saying as well, it was more a case of just putting the car in the right place rather than quite having that extra skill. Like, it was such a good drive by Lewis, but Red Bull, I think, were really unlucky to lose the race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say Red Bull, I wouldn't say it was a missed opportunity because Mercedes did put up a really, really good fight. And I think Red Bull had to expect that, Nathan, because even though Mercedes may not have had the fastest car over the course of the weekend, or in fact over the course of the last couple of weeks, they were able to outclass Red Bull on race strategy.
Yeah, definitely. It was a very bold strategy from Mercedes to go for those early pit stops with the hope that Hamilton would be able to hold off Verstappen at the end of the race, which is exactly what happened. I thought when Hamilton came in for his second stop that he would have to make a third stop, and I think Red Bull did as well. So it was a very bold, audacious strategy that Mercedes were able to pull off, and Red Bull just hoped that their pace, their overall slight pace, I don't think the advantage is quite as much as some people have been saying. Certainly on race pace, the two teams seemed a lot closer than compared to qualifying. But yeah, Mercedes just able to have that slight strategic edge in the end. It was very close, very finely poised, and that's what made the race so exciting to watch throughout.
So a rundown on the race result for the 2021 Bahrain Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, for the first time since 2015, he opens his 2020 opens in the first race of the season with the race victory. Max Verstappen 0.7 of a second behind him in second place, and it's Valtteri Bottas in third for Mercedes and getting the fastest lap point as well. Lando Norris was fourth for McLaren, great result for him, followed by Sergio Perez in his maiden outing for Red Bull in fifth. Charles Leclerc in sixth place for Ferrari. Daniel Ricciardo on his first outing for McLaren in seventh, followed by Carlos Sainz for Ferrari. Then it's Yuki Snowden on his Grand Prix debut, the first driver within the new millennium to score points in Formula One and to also start in Formula One. So a great start for him, for the Japanese rookie. Lance Stroll was the final point scorer in 10th place for the newly fledged Aston Martin team. Kimi Raikkonen was 11th for Alfa Romeo, followed by teammate Antonio Giovinazzi. Esteban Ocon was 13th, ahead of George Russell for Williams in 14th. Then Sebastian Vettel, a disappointing weekend for him, ending up in 15th. Then it's Mick Schumacher in 16th place for Haas. Pierre Gasly pitted to retire with 4 laps left with collision damage, but was classified in 17th. Nicholas Latifi was also classified, but he retired due to turbocharger issues. Fernando Alonso and Nikita Mazepin were not classified. Fernando Alonso having brake issues due to some debris that was picked up on the brake ducts. Nikita Mazepin crashed out on lap 1. So it's being sort of like the usual sort of start of the season, nothing too hectic like what we saw in Austria last year, Donnie. But I think in a way, when you look at a race result or the race that we have, it's not that an unpredictable result was needed. It's some great racing that we needed. And Bahrain was a great example of it.
Yeah, definitely. It was the same 3 guys on that podium, but my goodness, they worked a lot harder to fight their way there at the Bahrain Grand Prix. But I think throughout the whole field, there was so much good racing. You had Lando and Charles racing really close at some points. You had Seb and Alonso. You had Daniel and Carlos, were they not racing at some point? Obviously, Lewis and Max as well. I mean, Valtteri was a little bit on his own as per normal, but we'll let him off with it because the rest of the field definitely made up for it with really close wheel-to-wheel racing.
Yeah. And Nathan, who really surprised you? I mean, Leclerc was obviously very quick in the Ferrari. Norris was very good as well. And I have to say, I've been impressed with the sort of battle between Ferrari and McLaren out there. And if they continue that way, we could well see them challenging for podiums and maybe even on the odd occasion, the Grand Prix victory.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say that the team that surprised me the most was Ferrari. Coming into the season, they were a bit underwhelming in pre-season testing, and I thought that the likes of AlphaTauri and possibly Aston Martin would be ahead of them. But, Ferrari came this weekend and they were very solid in qualifying in the race, building out throughout the weekend. And Charles Leclerc put in a fantastic lap in qualifying and then backed it up in the race. Of course, they still have some work to do, but, I think Ferrari did a very solid job, and it's definitely a step forward compared to last season.
Yeah. Joe, were you impressed by Ferrari and McLaren's pace? Because we saw it in parts of qualifying on Saturday, where I think for a brief moment, Ferrari were topping the timing pages on the soft compound, albeit in comparison to Mercedes and Red Bull, who were setting their times on the mediums. But nevertheless, it's positive for Ferrari, and it's exactly the start that they needed. And, the next Grand Prix for them is a home race at Imola. So, the expectations will, of course, be very high. What can we see from Ferrari from this year?
Well, it should certainly be better than last year. It can't be much worse. I think you can't expect them to bounce straight back to where they were pre-2020 and challenging Mercedes for winning races and stuff. But third or fourth is definitely their aim. And with the drivers they've got, two really young, really hungry drivers, both have proved themselves, in multiple teams before, that they can go and get results beyond the car. I don't see a win out of the possibility of Ferrari. I mean, if there was any week they would love to do it, it would be next race week, of course, on home soil. But it's just good to see both Ferrari and McLaren really fighting back towards the front. It's like the good old days again.
And I have to say, Ferrari were excellent in Bahrain. I don't think you could put too much pressure on them to do as well as Mercedes or Red Bull, but it was just to be sort of pretty much in the mix, really, and to be fighting with the likes of McLaren, considerably better than Aston Martin and Alpine, who had finished above them in the Constructors' Championship last year. It's a positive start for Ferrari, and I'm really looking forward to see how they do with Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. I think that it will be one of the stories of the year in terms of how Sainz gets on with Leclerc and how they battle against each other. And I think one team that will be disappointed will be AlphaTauri, because although Yuki Snowden put in a great performance on Sunday, Nathan, the same couldn't be said with Pierre Gasly, because he had front wing damage on the fifth lap, the first lap since the safety car restart, and that put him on the back foot, needing the front wing, and the floor damage from the contact resulted in aerodynamic performance loss, and he retired towards the end. He wasn't able to make much progress from there. But a great qualifying from Gasly, setting his fastest Q2 time on the mediums to get through to Q3. How can you sum up Gasly this weekend? Because I can most definitely think they would be able to take some positives out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Gasly showed that he has the speed, that the car is very quick, just like the Red Bull around Bahrain. And, the fact that he was able to get into qualifying 3 on the medium tyres, setting him up for a very strong race if he didn't have that damage, and almost acting like a top car. I think after the first run in Q3, he was even ahead of Bottas in the Mercedes. So that was absolutely fantastic. And yeah, obviously it was unfortunate. I think he had contact with Ricciardo on that restart, as you said. So yeah, he can really take positives from the fact that AlphaTauri showed great pace. The fact that his teammate was able to fight through and get some points shows that the speed of the car is there. And, if we look back to last year, they did really well at Imola. So they'll be looking forward to the next race and hope to get a good result there.
Yeah. One driver who will be disappointed not to get to the end of the race was Fernando Alonso, Donnie, because he showed some good pace in qualifying ninth, sort of thereabouts trying to get into the points, but then he had a problem which had forced him to pit. I think it was like a sandwich wrapper that ended up stuck in the brake dots or something, which was a massive shame, because he would most definitely have got a point on the board for Alpine at least.
Yeah, I mean, you're not really shocked to see Alonso doing well, are you? Because he is one of those drivers, and it's just so intrinsic inside him to kind of be a great racer. So it was so good to see him back, like, straight in, and looked like he'd never been away. So it was great to watch, and obviously it was such a shame that he had a retirement. It's probably not quite how he was hoping for his season to start. So hopefully it's the only one of the year. Otherwise, he might get a bit grumpy.
Yeah. And I don't think there'll be too many occasions this year where he will be Grand Prix. He's got to give Alpine time, which he will do. And I do back Alpine to bounce back from it, and Imola's the next location where Alonso had that famous fight with Schumacher in 2005. That'll most definitely be on his mind, and hopefully he can put on as good of a performance, maybe not fighting at the front, but most definitely put on a better show than he did so in Bahrain. Alpine could do with bouncing back. With it being a 3-week period between races, I can imagine these teams are going to be, spending a lot of time in the factories, particularly wind tunnel performance, because the teams who finished lower than others in the Constructors' Championship last year will most definitely be spending a lot of that time with, in the wind tunnel. Joe, what's your take on this? Because I think it's up until June the 30th where the teams can use up their wind tunnel time. And who do you feel most confident about improving in terms of aerodynamic performance at Imola to what we saw in Bahrain?
Well, you'd think with the resources that they have and where they finished last year that Ferrari might improve even further. They've got much more than they would have had if they'd had a year comparable to their standards. So you'd like to think that they would be able to improve even further and perhaps even usurp McLaren as the third quickest car. I know it's very close there. And that would drag them even closer to the front of the fight, which ultimately is where they want to be. But I think Williams have got to do a little bit more as well, because I think they were fairly confident they'd be closer to the midfield than they were this time around. And I mean, Russell going to Q2 again, which is standard these days. He's brilliant on a Saturday. But I think they were hoping that Latifi would get a little bit closer as well, and they'd be more competitive in the race, which they really weren't.
Yeah. And George Russell was able to get into Q2 as well, which he got there on merit. Very well done to him, to Mr. Saturday himself. Nathan, did Williams surprise you a little bit? Because George Russell finished ahead of Sebastian Vettel in the race. I mean, Vettel had that damage with following the collision with Ocon, which saw him get a 10-second time penalty. And I think with Russell, I think you put on a decent show. Where do Williams lack, or where did they lack in the race?
Yeah, I think George did a fantastic job again. As I said, he getting into Q2 on a Saturday, and then he had a fairly decent race considering the performance of that car at the moment. Clearly the 9th quickest car in Formula One. Having good battles, but unfortunately not quite as competitive as their midfield rivals. They still perhaps lack a bit of aerodynamic stability and performance front to rear. So hopefully if they can use their wind tunnel time well, they can hope to develop their car further forward, because it definitely seems with the improved performance of the Ferrari power unit, the Alfa Romeo have taken a big leap forward and now not really within range of Williams at the moment.
Yeah. Donnie, would you agree with that with Nathan about Williams? Because I know you're a George Russell fan yourself, and you're a big fan of his racecraft and so and so. But how could you sum up Williams' weekend? And do you feel like they've made a step forward?
Yeah, I think they have. I think obviously you can start to see the new investment filtering through as well, which makes such a difference. And there's so much change going on in the background as well. Like they've got Jensen back in. So I think there's like lots of little steps that are coming forward. They're like qualifying, kind of George did really well in his qualifying. I do think Nicholas Latifi had, I mean, it doesn't look it by the kind of results, but I do think his race was quite good at points. So yeah, I definitely think they're on the up. Fingers crossed.
Yes, and I think with the way Williams have done in Bahrain, I think they can be satisfied with maybe not getting the points out of it, but just in terms of the performance going forward, I think they've got to say that they've made a step up from last year, considering the amount of downforce has been cut down from, I think it's from about 10% or something like that, which is a big difference. But I'm sure Williams can find a way with the time that they've got before Imola that they'll find that rear downforce, because downforce is a key element on the Imola racetrack, where George nearly got that points finish before he had that melody whilst behind the safety car. Not that I'm trying to jinx it, of course, but hopefully luck will be back on his side in a few weeks' time. One point we want to talk about, guys, is the controversial part of the weekend, is this last-in advantage. What is everyone's definition of last-in advantage? Joe, we'll begin with you on this, because during the weekend, the race director or the stewards have said that track limits for turn 4 would be in force during qualifying and practice, which means that any driver that goes off the track, all 4 wheels off the track, over the curb, lap time invalidated. On Sunday, we didn't quite see that. And this is something that I picked up on from quite a few people who have posted on social media, is that Lewis Hamilton went off at turn 4 no less than 29 times. 29 times. That's just over half of the race distance. What's your reaction to this, and how do you feel it's impacted on what we've seen over the course of the weekend?
Well, firstly, I don't agree with them changing the rules between qualifying and the race. You either say you can't go over it all weekend, or you can go over it all weekend. It shouldn't be a case of one person thinks you can't, one person thinks you can, which is what happened at the front. And ultimately, Hamilton was told to stop because Red Bull weren't particularly happy that he was extending the track, and Max Verstappen wasn't. But when it came to the overtake towards the end, I agree that Verstappen was right to give the place back, because of course you can't overtake someone off the track, regardless of whether you're forced there or whether you went there on purpose, whether there's track limits or not. You can't overtake if you've not got something on the track. So I agree that Verstappen was right to give it back, but I think the stewards just need to be more consistent. The white line is the limit. Go over it, you're penalised.
Yeah, and the white line's there for a reason, Donnie, because, without white lines, drivers are just going to be making up the track or manipulate the racetrack by designing a racetrack by themselves, by just simply going off the circuit. And we can't have that in Formula One. It doesn't quite work like that. I know in some circuits, in IndyCar, particularly at the circuit of the Americas, you see drivers completely going off the track, like completely over the white line, which they allow there. But in Formula One, it's not quite the same. And I don't get this whole track limits thing. I mean, if you go back about 4 or 5 years ago, the system with this track limits thing was a lot simpler and more strict. If all 4 wheels go over the white line, no matter where it is on the racetrack, lap time invalidated or warning, like we get in the F1 2020 game. Whereas now they seem to be lenient, but going down the wrong route of it. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think one of the key problems, and I know there's a review going on with the FIA stewarding this weekend anyway, because throughout all the series, F1 and F2, they had some shocking decisions as well. I think there just needs to be consistency and clarity. And part of the problem is because if there is an advantage which can be gained, of course the teams are going to try and gain it. So I think it just needs to be something that they kind of focus on and kind of make a decision that the white line is the edge of the track or whatnot. And then even some races, they're saying, oh no, it's actually like the red lines or whatnot. And I'm like, can we just make it simple for everyone? Like make it the white line, because it'll just save so much hassle. And it's probably going to challenge the drivers more as well, like, which is such a good thing as well. But I think it's difficult because obviously when you've got these overtakes pushing off and like following the line and stuff, there is a bit of like difficulty trying. But yeah, I think clarity and consistency is the kind of takeaway that we kind of know.
Mm-hmm. Nathan, we're interested to get your point on this, because some racetracks they do necessitate track limits, particularly Bahrain or Austria. Silverstone is another one as well. Whereas circuits maybe like Imola a little bit. Whereas there's so many circuits that are on the calendar. I'm just trying to think of ones that don't really require the use of track limits, because drivers are not gaining that much of an advantage. But what's your take on the situation? I mean, the Hamilton-Verstappen thing in the closing stages brought a lot of people's attention. But we're interested to get your verdict on this. And are stewards doing the right thing by deviating with the rules of having lap times invalidated on the Friday and the Saturday, but in the race they're not going to quite bother with it as much, unless it's a driver overtaking another one by going off the racetrack.
Yeah, that doesn't really make much sense to me, to be honest. You know, you need to have clear consistency, because what is a lasting advantage? Is a lasting advantage where you use something that isn't part of the racetrack in order to gain an advantage, or is it to overtake? You know, if there was a wall there, they wouldn't be using it. So the white line is the edge of the track, and as long as you have part of your car within the track, that's fine. But if you go over, then you should have 1 or 2 warnings in the race and then start getting penalised for that. You know, the fact that you said that Hamilton went over all 4 wheels over the white line 29 times during the Grand Prix is ridiculous. It could have changed the outcome of the Grand Prix. And, you know, I think we need to have clarity, and it needs to be consistent for all tracks, for all corners. You know, it needs to be a very clear system. And if they need to implement that, because the nature of the tracks now, in order to make the circuit safer, means that we have more runoff areas and less gravel and grass. So we need to have strict track limits in order for things to get sensible.
Yeah, and I perfectly agree. I mean, there needs to be a system where, I think, well, track limits are there for a reason, you know, and, you know, either respect the track, respect the limits, or you're going to get lap times invalidated or time penalties. And yes, the drivers are going to be pushing. You can't say that they're not going to push, or you don't want them to push. Of course they're going to push. You know, the best drivers in the world, they're going to be pushing for the best lap times. They're battling for positions out on circuit. They're battling for race victory. But there needs to be a consistency in regards to what they can do with track limits. What confirms to them what a lasting advantage is. You know, it baffles me. And they were very swift when Verstappen overtook Hamilton briefly, and then race control were obviously onto Red Bull to tell Max to give the place back. But do you feel that even if Max carried on in the lead, how much trouble would Red Bull have been in, Donnie? Because you don't want to see a driver sort of, I don't want to say cheating, but sort of pushing over the edge with the rules and then trying to bridge out a gap which may not be a penalty as such.
Yeah, I think we all kind of are aware and know that if he had kept that place, he would have got a penalty. He was very clearly off the track, and you can argue over if there was an advantage gained the 27 times Hamilton went off. There was definitely an advantage gained that time when Max overtook. And I think he did do the right thing, giving it back. It just wasn't executed quite right, because we saw that Max did have the pace. He had the better strategy. He has, in theory, the better car as well. So I think in the heat of the moment, or in the second, it made more sense for him to give that place back and then try and re-win it fairly, rather than kind of wait and see if there was going to be this penalty applied and how that would affect the race. The only problem was, as much as we did think Max would kind of get that overtake or have some more opportunities to get that second overtake, it didn't quite plan out like that. So there is now obviously that question of if he should have just drove off into the distance. But I think it shows a lot of maturity of Red Bull as well, because we definitely know Red Bull of the past, or Max Verstappen of the past, would have just continued on and wouldn't have had that kind of strength to kind of think it through and kind of play by the rules so much. So I think that was good to see.
Yeah. One driver which we're going to go on to next is Yuki Snowden, who had a brilliant outing for AlphaTauri. Very unlucky in qualifying, Nathan, but in the race itself, it was able to pull off some great moves, most particularly Fernando Alonso, which he said that the overtake on Fernando was emotional to him. And you have to say that if he turns 21 this year, I believe, and I think Fernando Alonso, I think it was less than a year old when Fernando Alonso made his F1 debut, which, you know, it's hard to think that, really, isn't it?
Wow, yeah, absolutely incredible. You know, Yuki is I think already winning lots of fans. You know, the way that he was able to compose himself on his Grand Prix debut to score those points and come through the order the way that he did was fantastic. Yeah, that move on Fernando was just incredible. You know, so late on the brakes and into the first corner. So yeah, did a sensational job and already has got a couple of points on the board, and I'm sure he will continue to grow, not just physically, but as a driver as well throughout the season. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. Joe, your review on Tsunoda's performance over the weekend. I mean, there was obviously the let's just say the language thing in practice, where he was sort of swearing on the radio, you know, was complaining about traffic and so and so. But honestly, what a talent this guy could end up being over the course of the year. And I said before the season started that Tsunoda could be one of the surprises.
Yeah, I'll be honest. So I had my reservations about him moving up to Formula One so quickly. You know, he had 1 year in Formula 3, 1 year in Formula 2. He didn't win either championship. I thought he would have benefited from another year in Formula 2, but he's proved me wrong this weekend. I don't have any worries about him at all. I expect he'll have some difficult weekends, but over the course of the season, he should be absolutely fine. And I think he's going to push Pierre Gasly, who's one of the best midfield drivers around. He's going to push him very, very hard this year. He's got a tough year in his hands, Gasly. But to be honest, I didn't see the sweariness on Friday. I was otherwise occupied with university work. But it's good that he's not just doing all the same things that everyone else does in a way. He's being himself. And I think it's important for Formula One, and particularly Formula One fans in Japan, that they've finally got someone to cheer for again.
Yeah, and how important is it for Japanese motorsport, Donnie, with Tsunoda on the grid? Because it's a long time, 7 years, in fact, since Kamui Kobayashi raced for Caterham. And I feel that Tsunoda, providing he stays in the sport in the long term, he could well be a huge, huge star. Statistically, Formula One has yet to have a Japanese Grand Prix winner. Could Tsunoda become the first?
Oh, I'd love for Yuki to win a race. Oh, could you just imagine him on that podium, like smiling his little heart out? Would be so good. I think, yeah, obviously, as a nation, you want to support your own, and he definitely has the full of Japan supporting him. And yeah, they're going to get right behind him and love watching him. So it's going to be so lovely to see him and see him progress, because I definitely think he's going to get stronger with every race. He's come out fighting. He's got a win over his teammate already. So yeah, his season is going to be one to watch.
Yeah, and considering that he's already done a shakedown run at Imola as well, so he'll know the circuit very well over there with Tsunoda. So that could give him somewhat of an advantage over maybe some of the other drivers. But, you know, a lot of these drivers have raced at Imola last year anyway. So Tsunoda most definitely is going to be one of the surprises of the year, I feel. But we've only just had one race. But I've got a real good feeling that Tsunoda is going to be very much in the running for potentially maybe a 6th or a 7th place finish in a lot of the races this year. We'll find out soon enough with AlphaTauri, who seems to have most definitely made a step up with that Honda engine and with the front end of their AlphaTauri. So very good performance from Tsunoda, picking up 2 points on his F1 debut. And doing that, he becomes the 344th different driver in the history of Formula One to score at least a championship point. Really well done to him. Aston Martin. Now, Nathan, they came into the weekend with a new floor design. Okay. And Stroll did a decent job, it has to be said, but for Vettel, the same couldn't be said. I mean, at the end of Q1, he got hindered by the yellow flags with Mazepin spinning at turn 1 and Sainz stopping just after turn 8. He got into trouble with the stewards for failing to slow down, which got him not only a grid penalty, but also penalty points for it. And in the race, he was sort of, you know, trying to go on a long first stint, which didn't quite work out for him. And then he had the collision with Ocon, which he got a time penalty for, and 2 points on his license. So you have to say it's been a real baptism of fire for Vettel with Aston Martin.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think Vettel will be a bit disappointed, leaving Bahrain, to say the least. You know, he started his first outing with the team from the back of the grid, had a very messy race, as you said, crash with Esteban Ocon in a very kind of odd incident. So yeah, not exactly ideal, and got completely outclassed all weekend by Lance Stroll. So if Vettel was looking for that reset, leaving Ferrari, going to Aston Martin, he's not exactly got it. And to make matters worse, Aston have definitely taken a step back compared to where the Racing Point was last year versus the likes of Ferrari and AlphaTauri going into this year. It's going to be a tricky year for Vettel, but hopefully he can use his experience to start to finally get some results on the board and start to try and rebuild himself after leaving Ferrari following a difficult season last year.
Yeah. And it's only the first race of Vettel with Aston Martin, so there's still some time for him to turn it around. But yeah, Donnie, your review on Vettel, it's been quite a manic. Well, I wouldn't say manic, but it's been quite a topsy-turvy last couple of weeks for Vettel. Aston Martin didn't quite complete all the mileage that they needed to have done, and the floor itself, the floor design did elevate them up a little bit, but not so much. And you have to say Vettel was very unlucky, but some of it was all through his own doing.
Yeah, I think definitely a mixed weekend, but I think there's some real positives that can be taken out of it as well. As we say, it's this new environment, it's a reset. Like, do you actually ever expect anyone to do amazing on their first day at a new job? Like, it's his first race, so I do think we need to give him a bit of slack. Obviously, there was some very silly moments, such as him going into the back of Ocon, but he did manage those tyres really well at a track that was just not doing. Everyone was getting new tyres every 10 laps, so that first stint he did really well on. And I think there is, I mean, the whole race, the whole weekend isn't a positive, but I think there was moments that kind of they'll look back on in the debrief and be kind of happy with.
Yeah. And with the new floor for Aston Martin, already the third iteration that we've seen on the AMR21, the first at the shakedown and the second version at pre-season testing, is characterized by the massive presence of vortex generators and flow deviators along the lateral edge, where the diagonal cut begins at 1800 millimeters from the front wheel axle. Aston Martin is among those teams that have chosen to reduce the size of the floor, not diagonally, but rather almost horizontally, forming a stepped edge. This is probably to try to keep the edge of the floor more or less parallel to the bodywork and manage the vortexes of air in a more similar way to last year. Joe, we've seen, it was confirmed with Aston Martin that it's totally a different chassis to what it was with the Racing Point. So we couldn't really expect too much to be on the same level as what it was with the pink Mercedes of last year. But what's your take on the new floor? Because that was discussed during the weekend.
All that technical stuff went straight over my head. I haven't got a clue, if I'm honest. Yeah. But I don't know if it's a worry that they've used 3 different floors already, and there's only been 2 official sort of events, if you like. Obviously they've had a different one for the shakedown, but I worry that perhaps they're panicking already that it's not as good as it was last year, or that they've fallen down the pecking order, they've gone the wrong way, and they're desperately trying to find something that works. And I question why they decided to go a different way, because they saw last year the car worked. Perez got a victory in it. They looked competitive pretty much everywhere. I know it was a copy of the Mercedes 2019 car, but Mercedes know how to build a car. So if you're able to copy from them, why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. So, and whilst Aston Martin will be looking to make up for lost time, I think rear downforce is what a lot of the teams are still lacking at the moment. And I think over the course of the year, the rear downforce performance will end up recovering, but it's going to take a lot of time, I think, before they see the cars to be closer to the speeds of what we saw from last year. Alfa Romeo next I want to discuss. Donnie, your take on Alfa Romeo. No, they have most definitely done well in Bahrain at the weekend. 11th and 12th, Raikkonen just missing out on the points. And do you feel that Alfa Romeo are in better shape this year to what they were throughout last?
It's so hard to tell. I feel like no matter what Alfa do, no matter if it's good or bad, they never get any TV time. I feel like I never see them, so it's so hard to kind of figure out what they're actually doing. First off, I love their livery. It's so pretty. I just think it's so nice. But yeah, they're looking good. Like obviously they've got the same drivers, so they're kind of really cemented in that team now. But it's such a solid start. No kind of big incidents, nothing went wrong. So I think it's definitely a good start. We're not going to hope the world from them. We're not going to kind of place these great expectations on them. But yeah, they've definitely had a good weekend.
Yeah. And I have to say, Nathan, Raikkonen and Giovinazzi did a decent job for them. And if that's a sign of things to come, we could well see them sort of as the pure underdog team to the likes of McLaren, Ferrari and AlphaTauri to sneak into the points over the course of the year.
Yeah, definitely. I think they definitely have a great shot to get points on, perhaps not a consistent basis, but a fairly regular kind of basis throughout the course of the year. You know, I think they've definitely moved forward this year, and you know, with that improved Ferrari power unit, you know, and with an updated chassis, then Alpha can definitely hope for bigger and better things this year. So yeah, and Giovinazzi and Raikkonen, very established partnership. They can learn and develop from each other, and yeah, hopefully they can start to progress more towards the more established midfield this year.
Yeah. And Joe, with Alfa Romeo going about their business this year, you know, with a improved Ferrari engine, and it seems as though that they've managed to recover the lost ground to what they had from last year's Alfa Romeo. Are they going to be contenders for points a lot more often in 2021?
You have to say yes, really. You know, the two of the three Ferrari powered cars have gone forward. We won't talk about the third. They had a less than impressive weekend all round. But Alfa, the fact they're closer to the midfield, and Giovinazzi in particular, I was really impressed with on Saturday in qualifying. I think it was 12th, wasn't he? I think, which is much higher than I think he got at all last season. And the fact that they can be closer for when the midfield gets hectic and there's a few incidents, a few people retire, they're almost certain they're going to score points and more points than they did last year.
Yeah, so yeah, Giovinazzi out-qualified Raikkonen in qualifying. 12th fastest he was in Q2. Raikkonen was 14th. But very good job from them to get into Q2. Both cars getting into Q2, which is the first time in a long time that's happened, actually. So very well done to Alfa Romeo, who most definitely have made a step up from last year. Haas are the next team I'm going to go on. And I think for Mick Schumacher, it was very much a race of discovery, really, just to understand how the car works in race trim. Donnie, Mick did well. Nikita ended up in the barriers after turn 3. And you have to say for Haas, Mick had the sort of odd occasion when he was battling with another driver in the race, but I think it's going to be very much, you know, on the odd occasion, Mick picking up that elusive point for Haas team. And I think Gunther Steiner came out saying that if we get 1 or 2 points, then that would be a great season for them.
I mean, the car looks an absolute mess, doesn't it? Both of the drivers managed to spin on the road with no one nearby them. Nikita absolutely trashed his car, and then Mick didn't really do much better, was miles off as well and couldn't catch up. So yeah, I think both the drivers have obviously come in as rookies. You've got to give them a bit of slack. They kind of obviously aren't in an environment they're used to, and they've got kind of learning to do. But as we see Yuki, he scored points. So, I mean, it definitely can be done. But yeah, the Haas does not look like a fun car to drive. And I think they're going to be struggling for, definitely the first few races to kind of learn how on earth it reacts. And then potentially, very likely, throughout the whole year.
What is it about the Haas cars spinning so much, Joe? Because we've seen it a lot in testing where either Mazepin or Schumacher seem to be losing the rear a lot and end up spinning around. It just is the rear. What is it about that Haas car that keeps spinning? Is it stability? Is it balance? What is it?
Well, I don't quite have the answer, because if I did, I would be working for Haas or a Formula One team, but I can only assume that their mechanics have got confused. You know, their NASCAR team are racing on the dirt at Bristol. They're going sideways around every corner, but they've clearly not worked out that that doesn't work around Bahrain in a Formula One car. I don't really understand how the car's going sideways more than it's going forward, and you could see both drivers really struggling. And I think they've already said they're going to sort of write off this year development-wise and look at next year. And to be honest, I don't see them getting anywhere near points unless there's absolute carnage and 12 retirements in front of them.
Yeah. Nathan, what's your reaction to Haas's showing in Bahrain? Because I'm keen to get your thoughts on how difficult it is to drive that Haas. And it's not just, making it competitive, but to keep the car pointing in the right direction. And this is something we haven't seen for quite a long time with a modern day Formula One car.
Yeah, it's very strange. It looks like it lacks a bit of stability. Very, very odd to see both drivers spinning at the start of a Grand Prix all by themselves. Mazepin spun a couple of times in qualifying as well. So it looks like a very, very tricky car to drive. I don't know, maybe the wind has something to do with it. I'm not quite sure, but they need to try and get on top of that very quickly. But by the sounds of it, they're not going to be developing the car after the next race. So if anything, this is going to be their best point of the season. So it's going to be a very tricky year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hard year for the team. And I think for Mick, I think it's a bit like with Charles Leclerc, where the first few races he did with Sauber 3 years ago, it took him a few races to get up to speed. And then by Baku, that was when he sort of really, really clicked. I'm not saying that's going to be the same with Schumacher, but I just think once he understands the car's ability and what it can do, he'll try and sort of convert it into his own style of driving and produce a better performance than the way he had in Bahrain. You can only get better for Schumacher. That's my take on it. And with Nikita Mazepin crashing into the barrier, obviously there was quite a trend on social media with, making a bit of a mockery out of him and so. But it's a long year ahead. And at least, statistically, Nikita Mazepin has completed more corners of a racing lap on his F1 debut than Felipe Massa did 19 years ago in Australia 2002. That's some consolation right there. So having a look at the Drivers' Championship, well, bearing in mind we've only done one race so far, but we'll have a look at the standings anyway. Lewis Hamilton takes the early lead in the Drivers' Championship. He's on 25 points. It's Verstappen in second on 18, Bottas in third on 16, then it's Norris on 12, Perez on 10, Leclerc on 8, Ricciardo on 6, Sainz on 4, Tsunoda on 2, I should say, and Stroll in 10th with 1. Leaving Raikkonen, Giovinazzi, Ocon, Russell, Vettel, Schumacher, Gasly, Latifi, Alonso and Mazepin yet to pick up a point so far. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes picking up 41 points out of a possible 44 in Bahrain. They have a 13-point lead over Red Bull, who are second on 28. Then it's McLaren in third on 18, Ferrari in fourth on 12. Then it's AlphaTauri in fifth on 2, Aston Martin in sixth with 1, leaving Alfa Romeo, Alpine, Williams and Haas yet to get off the mark there. So obviously it's the first race, guys, so we can't sort of reflect on the standings as what is going to be by the end of the year. But we've got a lot of races and plenty more still to come as well. Now, the next race of the championship at Imola is to be held without fans. Now, it's the second year in a row that the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix is going to be without fans, which is a massive, massive shame. Imola returned to the Formula One schedule in 2020 as part of a calendar that was heavily overhauled due to the pandemic. Organisers outlined plans for spectators to attend in a limited capacity, but this was abandoned in the run-up to last autumn's event as Italy introduced tighter measures. Imola was added to a revised 2021 calendar as the second round, due to be held from April the 16th to the 18th, but once more, it'll be held behind closed doors. Italy, including the Emilia-Romagna region in which Imola is located, recently reintroduced tighter measures amid an increase in COVID-19 cases. Of last year's 17 races, paying spectators were only permitted in a limited capacity at Mugello, Sochi, Nürburgring and Portimao. The weekend's Bahrain Grand Prix was due to welcome spectators, which it did, through only locals who have either been vaccinated or have fully recovered from the virus. Organisers of events in Europe across the spring and summer months are continuing to monitor the situation in conjunction with governmental decrees. It has already been confirmed that Azerbaijan's Grand Prix, planned for early June in Baku, will be held without spectators. Your reactions to this, guys? Joe, we'll begin with you on this. And it's a massive shame with Imola not having fans for a second year in a row, because I'm sure Ferrari would love to see the fans there. But with the situation with COVID in Italy, the show has to be done without fans there. And I, for one, would love to see fans back at the circuit, but not when it's not safe to do so.
Yeah, it is what it is. Sadly, it's going to be the story throughout the year. There's going to be certain countries that have dealt with it better than others, and some races will have fans back. Some may have full capacity. Some may have nothing at all. It is going to be, isn't it? It's a shame because the Italians are loud, let's say, when it comes to their support. You certainly notice them more than anywhere else, but once the visor goes down for those 20 drivers, they're not going to be interested in how many fans are on the banks, if any at all. They'll be looking at turn one and how to avoid an accident, probably. Yeah.
Nathan, your reflection on Imola not having fans again, it's hard for them, because I'm sure Ferrari would have loved to see them there. Ferrari's home race as well, which they'll want to do well, particularly with Leclerc and Sainz and with the Ferrari car improving. How much of a loss will it be to Imola, and will that affect the future of Imola hosting a Grand Prix?
Obviously, yeah, it's a shame, but that's the situation in Italy at the moment, and I think it is great that Formula One returns to Imola for the second year in a row, and Ferrari will of course want to do well at their home event, regardless of whether there are fans there or not. I would just like to say that I hope that we can return to Imola when we have fans, when fans are able to be here, because we've had 2 races now at the Imola circuit without fans, and it would be great to have a fully fledged event in the future.
Nevertheless, Donnie, we can still enjoy a great Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. To be honest, it should be called the San Marino Grand Prix, but I don't know why it's not called that. But it's a shame, because we'd love to have seen fans at Imola, but with the coronavirus situation in Italy right now, it's not great, and it's hard to take it on the chin. But the teams have done it before, and they can most definitely do it again.
Yeah, definitely. I think we just need to be so thankful. Like this time last year, we didn't even know if we were going to get any races, and then went ahead and obviously got those 17 amazing races last year. So I think we just need to be really thankful that kind of the races are going ahead, everyone's safe, and we can go racing in this kind of safe environment. Obviously, the TV broadcast is really good, and I mean, it's disappointing for how many thousand fans or whatnot that will or could have been at the circuit, but for the kind of millions more who would have watched it on TV anyway, not too much has changed. So definitely some positives we can take away.
Yeah, most definitely. And, if Imola can still host an event anyway, then at least that's a Grand Prix filled in. You'd much rather have a Grand Prix going on than not at all. Particularly at Imola, because I'm a huge fan of Imola. I don't know why. It's just the nostalgia of it, from the video game inside of it, and its establishment on the Formula One calendar in the previous years prior to 2000, before it came off the calendar after 2006. It was it didn't quite feel the same without it, and the fact that Formula One went back there last year was a huge relief, and I'm so happy that they're going back there again. So fingers crossed on a good race at Imola. Whilst one Grand Prix will be held behind closed doors, question marks are raised over the Canadian Grand Prix as to whether it will go ahead this year. And essentially what it is that the Canadian Grand Prix's fate is to be determined in the coming weeks. Formula One's visit to the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in 2020 became one of many casualties of the pandemic, with the championship remaining only in Europe and in the Middle East. This year's Canadian Grand Prix is scheduled to be held as the 7th round on June the 13th, and would mark a return to North America for the first time since November 2019. But a decision on the event's viability is due to be made shortly. With the government authorities, we have agreed that we should not go beyond the Easter weekend, so that is why I expect a response in the next few days, race promoter Francois Dumontier said in an interview with Canadian broadcaster RDS. There are still a lot of uncertainties when we look at the pandemic situation in Quebec in general. Formula One wants to come to Montreal, that's obvious. It's a big step in the championship, and they have a strong health plan. Obviously, we have preparations before the Grand Prix. If ever we cannot present the Grand Prix in June, Formula One will not leave this weekend empty, so it will offer it to another country. All non-essential travellers arriving in Canada are subject to a mandatory 14-day quarantine, though the measure is set to be relaxed for NHL players, reduced to 7 days. However, with the Azerbaijan set to take place a week before Dumontier has accepted, even on a 7-day quarantine, it's almost impossible to achieve it. And with Montreal, they've got a contract until 2029, Donnie. Can you see Canada going ahead this season? Because bearing in mind it's a street circuit as well, which is another, you could say, a little bit disadvantage. I don't know, pretty much a disadvantage, let's say. That's trying to put in that word. I don't know why I was thinking advantageous or disadvantageous. I don't know if that's even a word. But your reaction with Canada, and do you feel it will go ahead?
I don't know. It's so hard to plan things at the long term right now, and obviously you can speculate as much as you want. I think some of the key points is it's a professional sport, so there is more like allowances made because of this, and the teams have kind of proof that they can live in these bubbles, they can follow procedures. They are now probably can do COVID tests until they kind of go blue in the face, and I'm sure a lot of them have also been vaccinated by now as well. So it's a much better position than it would have been this time last year. Whether it's going to go ahead or not, only time will tell. So it would be, I'd love to see it. I'd love for us to go racing in Canada. It would be great. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. Nathan, if Canada was to not go ahead, as it's stated in Motorsport Week's article, which country would fill in for Canada? Because you've got Azerbaijan, that's the weekend before, and the one country that comes to my mind is Turkey, because that's pretty much on the border of Azerbaijan. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That would make perfect sense. Trying to keep the races as close together as possible. I was just thinking, having a Baku, Montreal back-to-back anyway would be a logistical challenge for the teams in normal times. Never mind trying to do it in the middle of a pandemic. So, I think Turkey would be a suitable venue if, for whatever reason, the race in Montreal can't take place. Nürburgring is the other race that comes to mind. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. See how this story develops. But, Turkey would be a good option.
Yeah. Joe, what's your take on Canada's situation? Do you think it is safe enough to go to Montreal in June? And I know it's a few months away still, and there's a decision that still needs to be made. But would you want Canada to be going ahead?
Well, yeah, I've generally enjoyed the racing at Canada as a childhood Jenson Button fan. There's some very fond memories there from 10 years ago now, unbelievably. But yeah, as much as I'd love it to go ahead, I was already sceptical when the calendar came out. As Nathan said, going from Azerbaijan to Canada, complete opposite side of the world, and having 5 days before you go practicing, if that, it's going to be difficult to haul all the equipment over there. They probably have to have 2 teams for each sort of team, 2 teams of mechanics setting stuff up beforehand, because once the pack down, the travel, the putting back up, you're not leaving much time anywhere for rest and recuperation, which might not be as important for mechanics, but they still need it because it's a hard job that they do. And I'm sure we'll see Turkey back on the calendar if another race is going to fill in its place, which is looking likely.
Yeah. I'm going to answer a couple of questions from our audience, guys. And the first one, at BA Fuller 54, is saying, will Sebastian Vettel improve as the year goes on with his new team? Who wants to answer that first?
Oh, go on, I'll bite the bullet then. I don't know. He might improve slightly, but I don't see him improving to a point where he's matching Stroll or beating Lance Stroll. I mean, it's sad to say this because statistically he's a top 5 driver of all time, but I think his best years are behind him, and we know how much he wants to sort of spend more time with his family. I think this or next year could be the final ones we get of Sebastian Vettel. So I hope he improves, and I hope he manages to smuggle his way to a podium somehow later in the year, because I think it'll be the perfect send-off for him.
Nathan, your views on Vettel. Will he improve as the year goes on?
I hope so. You know, it's been a bit sad, really, seeing the way that Vettel has equipped himself, or not really equipped himself so well in Formula One in the last couple of years. So hopefully the team can improve, and he can help to improve as the team gets better. But he needs things in a certain way to be just as he likes them in order to perform to his best. So it's going to be difficult for him to improve substantially, I would say.
Donnie, your views on Vettel. Is he going to improve over the course of the season? And if so, when will we see you improve him?
I mean, he can't get much worse than his qualifying start on Sunday, can he? Good start. Yeah, I definitely do think he'll improve. There's going to be the races that he shows moments of brilliance again. Look back to Turkey last year. Is that the right one? When he got podium, whichever one that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to improve. There's going to be moments of brilliance. However, consistency, I don't think it's quite going to be there. But I don't think every weekend's going to be as shocking as Bahrain was.
Yeah. One more question from @TGS_F1. 2 questions, in fact. Which team or driver impressed you the most and disappointed you the most? Who wants to answer that first? I'm going to pick now, aren't I? I will start off with Nathan this time. Nathan, which team or driver impressed you the most and disappointed you the most?
I would say probably Yuki Snowden impressed the most. Probably quite an obvious one, but you know, first Grand Prix in Formula One, scoring points, and yeah, AlphaTauri did a fantastic job throughout the course of the weekend, and hopefully, they can continue. Which team driver disappointed me? Probably Sebastian Vettel. You know, don't want to pick on him too much, but you know, not the greatest start to the season, and his team and his first outing with Aston Martin.
Yeah. Donnie, which team or driver impressed you the most and disappointed you the most? Would you go with Nathan, or do you have another driver in mind?
I'm going to go with Lando Norris. I think he's such a good driver, but you sometimes forget how good he is, and he has these moments of brilliance. And I think his race was really good. Such a strong opening performance to the season. So yeah, I was really impressed with how much pace he had. Disappointed, I think I'm going to have to say Pierre Gasly. He was on for such a good qualifying, set himself up, and then I was just a bit disappointed about the fact that he could not make up any time. He was absolutely miles down the road. And in what you would argue would be kind of the top of the midfield in a car that should have pace, just could not make that time back, which I think wasn't the best.
Mm-hmm. Joe, which team or driver impressed you the most and disappointed you the most in Bahrain?
Well, I was going to say Lando myself, because I don't think he's been talked about enough for his performance. You know, he's sort of outshone Ricciardo all weekend, apart from the one session where it mattered on Saturday in Q3. He just got pipped. I think impressing wise, I think that Aston Martin is not as good as Lance Stroll made it look in a way. I think Lance Stroll was an impressive. He was always in the points. I think, you know, from the start to the end of the race, he was in the top 10 barring a pit stop cycle. And I think that's a very good performance in a car that's not really that favoured. You know, it's probably similar to Alpine, where it's the next best after the top 5 that we now have. Mm-hmm. Disappointing wise, I will say Alpine, because I know Alonso had his problems with sandwich wrappers in brake ducts or whatever it was that happened that caused him to retire, but you didn't see Esteban Ocon a great deal, and apart from when he was getting punted by Vettel, that was the only time he saw him all race, really. And I would have expected more from them, because they were not far away from McLaren at all, if not on par with them at the end of last year. And while McLaren taken a big step forwards, Alpine have seemingly gone backwards.
Yeah. To answer your question, Ollie, I am going to be saying that the team and the driver that's going to be, that impressed me in Bahrain, I would say, I think you've got to say Mercedes and Lewis, because I think the way they've outperformed or outmaneuvered Red Bull in a race that we felt that Red Bull were the favourites to go and win. I think for Mercedes to outclass them in that manner was splendid. I thought that they really needed to do that, and it was a good way for them to open their account for the year. And the team that disappointed me the most, or the driver that disappointed me the most, I think I've got to say Alpine disappointed me the most. I mean, Ocon's pace wasn't quite there. Alonso was thereabouts in the points before he had his brake duct issue. Driver that disappointed me, I think you've got to say Pierre Gasly, because he just never recovered from that calamity on lap 5. We had that front wing damage and it compromised the car performance, and he retired later on. But I'm confident that Gasly will bounce back in the races to come anyway. We'll round off the show, guys, with a little bit about the potential championship battle: Hamilton versus Verstappen. Now, is the race in Bahrain a real sign of things to come, Joe? Because I've got a great feeling we're going to see two cars from two different teams, or two drivers from two different teams, tussling it out on circuit on a race day, and this is what Formula One is all about.
God, I really hope it is. I'm getting quite bored of these one driver title fights that we've had over recent years. Despite Bottas makes us all excited at the start of the year that he's back, and then 3 races in, it's the same old story. But I think the best part about this is that it's 2 different cars. It's not an inter-team battle. There's not going to be any kind of politics with, we've got team code, you've got to do the same strategy as your teammate or anything. It's going to be a straight fight, hopefully, with both cars evenly matched. But I still believe that Hamilton will come out on top simply because the Mercedes is a far more reliable engine than a Honda, and eventually Max Verstappen's car will go bang or will just shut off like Perez did on the warm-up lap, and the points he'll lose there will ultimately be crucial in the battle.
Yeah. Donnie, Hamilton versus Verstappen, a genuine title fight between those two over the course of the year, or do you think Lewis will still have enough in the tank to sustain the consistency over the course of the year like we have seen from him in the last few years?
No, I definitely do think it's going to be a really close title fight. Obviously, we've got 23 races predicted, so it's going to be such a long season. There's so much to play for, and I think I can never decide if the fact it's such a long season neutralizes to an extent any DNFs and kind of allows more opportunities. So yeah, I think if we can just keep having racing close like that for the wins and whatnot, it's definitely going to be close. It's going to be good.
Yeah. Nathan, the title fight between Hamilton and Verstappen, I think it's going to be reveling up for a breathtaking season and a breathtaking title fight, providing we don't see too many melodies involving either driver that season fall too far out of the title race. Like we saw with Verstappen last year, there were so many races where luck just wasn't quite on his side. But should the Honda-powered Red Bull be reliable enough, Red Bull could call themselves title contenders, providing Perez gets pretty much on the same pace as Bottas.
Yeah, I think so. The last few years, Red Bull have started the year quite slowly, and towards the end of the year have started to be kind of within Mercedes' pace. But this year they've started with on par, if not slightly ahead of Mercedes on pure pace. So if they can maintain that over the course of the season, and if Perez can have a clean Saturday, which I think he will, sooner rather than later, then they can string together a decent year and we can have a fantastic title fight between Mercedes and Red Bull throughout the course of the season.
Yeah. We'll end the show there, guys. Thank you to everyone that's listening into this podcast and sending their questions prior to the show. Next week, Michael Gillespie, Tom Featherstone and Tinis Ferreira will be with me to share their thoughts on the latest in Formula One. From Nathan, Joe, Donnie and all of us at Motorsport Week, it's goodbye.